Welcome back to Maritns and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips. And this episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of this podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you.
What's happening, Spoon?
Well, I'm sitting here having cobbled together this home studio again. Unfortunately, I had to take it down to use in other places for other projects, and so some technical difficulties getting it put together, but now it's back together. Here we are. I am pretty excited about this episode, something very new to the Martin part of Maritns and More.
All right, I think we have an island vibe going on today. This episode is brought to you by the Oahu. What is this whole thing about? It's the brand new guitar from Martin Guitar. And if you play this guitar just exactly the right way, it will take you emotionally to the white sandy beaches of Hawaii, but it will not take you there literally. See details.
Well, you never know about that. It's not just the Oahu, it's the first model in a new series of Martin guitars called Oahu, and it actually says Oahu on the headstock. This new one, this first one, is the HG-28 Oahu, and there'll be probably aficionados of vintage guitars out there scratching their heads saying, HG? Where have I heard that before? You already kind of gave away what the HG stands for. The HG stands for Hawaiian Guitar. This is Martin's Hawaiian Guitar series, and this Hawaiian guitar is in the venerable Style 28, and it's pretty exciting. And the interesting thing is this guitar has been in the works for a little while now, and it was a faster project than a lot of their other projects. It also was kind of a surprise to everybody. And Chris Martin has a video on the Martin website, and you can probably see it other places as well, where he is sitting in a room with some of his personal guitar collection with Craig Thatcher, the guitarist that does a lot of demonstration work for Martin. He's a local Pennsylvania musician. If you're not familiar with him, excellent guitarist, fantastic guy. And he also had the honor of being the only artist in the history of the entire universe who was granted permission to be an official Eric Clapton tribute act. This is going back quite a long ways now. But and he became friends with Dick Boak, and then became friends with other people at Martin. And in recent years, when Chris Martin started going on the road, doing his own little road shows about his travels to Mark Newkirchen in Germany and the history of the Martin guitar, Craig would often accompany him as the guitarist that then would play these different models to demonstrate some of the models throughout the Martin history and so forth. So he was there to demo this new guitar. The fascinating thing about it is they only mention this guitar at the very, very end, and they say almost nothing about it. So I will be able to flesh out some information that, some questions that people may already have about this guitar. So, but very exciting, the HG-28. What do you know about it so far?
I'll be honest, I know very, very little. I saw this come out publicly, and oftentimes, and some people on this podcast, not named me, hear about things a little bit earlier. This is one of those instances where I actually was, the caught off guard wouldn't be the right way to say it, but it surprised me, the timing of it. I know very, very little about it, and almost so little that everybody listening, including me, we're all going to get to learn from you today. So this is something I can contribute some really good pictures, a good can-do attitude, and I don't have a lot of backstory, I apologize. But let me show you a picture while I'm thinking about that to make up for what I lack in other areas. Check this thing out. How pretty.
So look at that. So a lot of people are going to look at that and say, that looks a lot like a dreadnought, and yet it doesn't look quite like a dreadnought. What do we have? We have a paddle headstock. We have a shape that's reminiscent of a Martin dreadnought. Some people might recognize it as being reminiscent of guitars made by other makers. And one of the first things I thought of was the Ditson guitars. When Martin was making special models for the Ditson musical department store in the early 20th century, they were made a series of instruments that had similar waist shape to them. That most of them were quite tiny, but they did eventually start making the very first dreadnoughts were made for the Ditson department store, and they actually advertised them as the bass guitar for mandolin orchestras. But we now know that original dreadnoughts were inspired by a famous Hawaiian music star who had actually written to Frank Henry Martin, Chris Martin's great-grandfather, and asked him if he would be willing to make a guitar bigger than their largest guitar, which was the 12-fret triple O at that time, which that artist was playing. None of this stuff was remembered at Martin. Martin is, like many companies, are much more interested in what they're doing now and what they're going to be doing in the future. And a lot of things that Martin did in the past that a lot of people find ultra cool now actually weren't remembered. All kinds of things. One example is the forward shifted scallop bracing. There was a repairman whose name I used to know in Ohio who reached out to Martin decades ago and said, "Can you tell me why you guys changed the bracing in 1939 from the, about approximately 1 inch from the sound hole to, forward, back, farther back and all that?" Martin had no record whatsoever of the forward shifted bracing. It was a complete surprise to them, of anybody who was living at and working at Martin at that time. So then they started looking at it to themselves and, started realizing that. There's other instances along those lines. Another one is the vintage gloss finish that's used on the Style 28 and Style 18 guitars in the vintage series, which has a lower sheen to it. It's not like a matte finish. It's still a gloss finish, but it's not nearly as mirrored and glassy as the high gloss finish. And that too was not known about until somebody discovered the correspondence between Frank Henry Martin and somebody and a letter where he actually detailed their finish differences and how they accomplished their finishes back in those days, which then led to Martin changing the authentic series to historically accurate vintage gloss, as they call it, less gloss, and you had to get a 45 or 42 to be able to get that super high gloss. So this whole HG thing followed a similar pattern. Now you remember Greg, the Canadian, Greg Hutton, the Canadian archivist, yes? You've met him before, haven't you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. He was hired by Dick Boak to go in and help Dick Boak organize the Martin archives. And the Martin archives in those days were literally just like filling up odd boxes and filing cabinets in the upper attics of the old factory. And so it was quite a chore. And they'd have other people go in there from time to time, but no one had ever really systematically organized them. And, they had the old ledgers and stuff, but the correspondence and other, and advertising information, all that stuff. And a lot of this stuff has shown up in a variety of these books that have showed up. The Washburn book that had come out a long time ago. Of course, the original Mike Longworth book had some information. He was really the first person to try to go in there. But anyway, so Craig comes along. He is a professional archivist. And he goes in there and systematically went through the stuff with Dick, and they discovered some amazing stuff. They discovered that correspondence about the finish. They also discovered the correspondence between Major Kielaki, and his name was Major. He wasn't a major in the Army. Major Kielaki, the Hawaiian artist. And they found out that he had designed a guitar based on the Martin Tripolo and sent the plans to Frank Henry Martin, and they agreed to make the guitar. There were probably some tweaks to it. That has since come out in recent years as the two major Kealaki instruments. It's a very unusually shaped instrument, but they now realize that was the inspiration for the dreadnoughts that they ended up making for the Ditson Company starting in 1916 and eventually started making under the Martin brand name in 1933. So that, I think, is what started Chris on this new interest in learning about the history of Hawaiian music. And that long story led to this guitar through a happenstance where, now I don't know how much of this stuff they want known or not, but I'm going to say what I know anyway, most of it. But anyway, I do know that he has said that he collects guitars and he likes to go to auctions, and he sometimes will ask someone to go along with him. And Mr. Thatcher was asked for one time, and they went to an auction, and he saw a really weird, what to his eyes was a really weird guitar. It was a Gibson guitar that had a sound hole, but it also had 4 little F holes that almost looked like ribbon design. And I know people out there have seen these guitars out there in the world, but they were the Gibson HGs. They were the Gibson Hawaiian guitars. So if you have to go all the way back to 1912, when there was the Pan-Pacific exhibition in San Francisco in 1912. And part of it was a way to try to revitalize the economy for San Francisco, which had been decimated by the great earthquake and fire, the San Francisco fire in 1906. Basically, it was also to celebrate the Panama Canal was new and bustling, and so being able to, trade between the eastern seaports and San Francisco had, been revolutionized by the Panama Canal. And so this was a big exposition, and the Hawaiian Pavilion was the big hit, and everybody just flipped over the Hawaiian music and the Hawaiian food and the hula dancers and the whole, traditional Hawaiian thing. And you can bet your bottom button that the Dole Pineapple Company invested an enormous amount of money as well, because they were we had colonized Hawaii, and they were working very hard to try to get statehood in Hawaii at that time. And but anyway, people flipped out about Hawaiian music. It became a huge craze in a way that crazes don't really happen these days. But it swept the country. C.F. Martin and Company was the very first mainland company to take it seriously and start to make ukuleles. The ukuleles, the ukes that they made really helped keep Martin afloat in the hard times during the First World War and out across the Great Depression. It was really the ukulele sales that kept Martin from going under. And because Martin guitars were really expensive. All of the top classical, soloists used Martin guitars in those days in America, and it was very much an elitist product. Very few were made every year and all that sort of thing. So the ukuleles and their other Hawaiian style instruments really kept them going. That also forced Martin into finally embracing experimenting with steel strings, because as you may know, Hawaiian instruments, Hawaiian guitars are played like a lap steel with a steel and need steel strings. The traditional Hawaiian guitars don't have raised frets. You can't play them like a normal instrument. They have flat frets just to give you fret positions, and they're played with very high strings, and often with the strings tuned down into open tunings that make the strings very slack, which is where the term slacky guitar comes from. Mm-hmm. This is all going back starting in the early 1900s. They come out with the big dreadnought after Major Kealaki's very unusual guitar, and then everybody else starts doing it too. So Gibson, Lyon and Healy, Washburn, everybody was starting to make Hawaiian guitars with steel strings. And some were more successful than others. Martin's were very successful. And Gibson's HG basically took the slope shoulder Martin Ditson really dreadnought design, and that's what they based theirs on. And that's where this body shape comes from. It's very similar. It's not exactly the same. It's very similar to the old Gibson HGs. You have a sound hole, and then you have these 4 F holes. And inside the guitars, you have this, it's almost like a ship's keel. You have this thin shaped piece of wood inside the guitar that's attached to the sound board, but sticks way down in the guitar like a ship's keel, and goes around the guitar on the inside. And the idea is that you're getting all the vibrations coming from the soundboard going in, and some of it comes out of the sound hole, some of it goes under that bevel and comes out through the F holes. And
wow.
it was an experimental way to try to get the most sound out of these big bodies with steel strings. They made the HG-20, the HG-22, and the HG-24. They're all the exact same guitar. It's just the level of trim in those styles. And I think the one that Chris bought was an HG-22. That was not in playable shape, but it was pretty beaten up. But he took it, thought the whole thing was fascinating because he'd just been doing all this research on Hawaiian music and the history of Hawaiian music, and how and finally, really, the light bulb going on in his head about how the Hawaiian music craze, starting in 1912 up through in the 20s, greatly informed and influenced Maritns' guitar design into inventing their modern steel string guitars. And so the o-ahu guitars are a homage to the Gibson Hawaiian guitars and the whole Hawaiian guitar history, much in the same way that other Martin models that have been designed by or with Chris Martin's influence were also paid homage to Gibson models from the early 20th century. Can you name some of those?
Early Gibsons?
What Martin models are based on Gibson models?
Well, the CEO7 is certainly related to I'm going to say LOO, but I often...
That's correct. Yeah, it's LOO. Oh. On the nosy.
I thought it was named Nose.
But we have, yeah. But you can go all the way back to the CEO6, which it was inspired by the J45. And,
oh, right. Yeah.
Yep. And the CEO8s, which were inspired by the Super Jumbo, the SJ200. And also, to be fair, the old Guild Jumbos, big Guild Jumbos as well. And just if people are not familiar with it, the term jumbo, the jumbos, that's the term that Gibson came out with for their version of the Dreadnought. And so as some people may know, Martin only made 12-fret guitars all the way up until 1929, very late 1929, when they came out with their first experimental orchestra models, and which were the O17 and then the O-28, 18, and 45, though those had stamps that said OM18, OM28, OM45, their first 14-fret instruments. They decided to move their entire line to 14 frets in 1934, well, in 1933, but starting in the 1934 catalog, when they renamed the OMs to OO, and finally gave us their 14-fret Dreadnought. Gibson beat them to it because Gibson's first 14-fret Jumbo came out 2 years earlier in 32, and also their Hawaiian guitars. And so the Gibson Hawaiian guitars had that weird shape and an elongated neck, and that's what this guitar is based upon. But that's about as far as it goes because the bracing's very different. The bracing is definitely Martin bracing, and there's other aspects about it that are quintessentially Martin. So Chris Martin is now calling this the guitar that Gibson should have built in the Great Depression but didn't.
Well, speaking of Gibson, do you know, and I don't know if you know the lineage, but does the Gibson Roy Smeck have anything to do with any of this backstory? Because I know
Yeah,
that's
the Smecks were originally Hawaiian
yeah.
guitars. That's a very good, The Smecks were Hawaiian guitars. They were originally set up to be played in lap style. And as some people may know, the Martin Hawaiian guitars were basically just Martin guitars, and all they did was change the bridge and the nut and then maybe they changed the neck angle, but I don't think so, to raise the strings up. So you could play. Now they had some models that were made with flat frets. You could order them with flesh frets, but they also made them with regular frets, and you could put in an adjustable bridge that would raise the strings, or an adjustable nut, or however that worked. So you could actually convert it for Spanish style playing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's very good. They're Roy Schmeck's very good example of gigantic Hawaiian style guitars. But these were not the HGs. They didn't have the weird bevel inside, and they didn't have the 4 F holes in addition to the sound hole. So, but they weren't very successful. They didn't really sound that great. So, like a lot of things, they went extinct, even though they greatly influenced later Gibson designs as well. So now that brings us up to this modern guitar. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the specs that's on this new HG-28 Oahu?
Well, the one that's most surprising to me, because we just spent 15 minutes talking about giant, oversized, big, deep. This guitar, while it does have, I'll use the word dreadnought in parentheses, while it has a dreadnought profile and not the traditional square shoulder 14 fret designs that we all know with the waist and how it happens, this guitar has a triple O body depth, which makes me wonder immediately, and this is a question for you later, not this part of the show, but I will wonder if this was ever in the working. Were the plans for this guitar happening while they were coming out with the major Kealaki? Because that guitar, shares a lot of similarities, but this specific instrument makes me think of not dreadnought when they call this thing the Hawaiian HG. When I saw the press release and I saw the pictures before I got to that part of the spec sheet, I was surprised when I did learn this guitar is not deep.
That's correct, and the Gibson guitar it's based on is not deep either. It has a shallow body. So
is that right?
It is a dreadnought shape, but it is not dreadnought sized. This guitar is only the cubic centimeters inside it is only a little bigger than the OOL. In fact, this guitar, so this is how it worked. You're talking about, was this in the works and stuff? This was not in the works. Chris bought this guitar. He brought it to at Martin Guitar and said, can you, what do you think of this? What do you think about trying to build me one of these that's like a Martin version of this? And he said, we can do that. And so did that. And I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to mention names or not about this. And so they made one handmade guitar. They put it together, made it by hand, worked it all out, brought it to Chris. He absolutely loved it, thought it was fantastic, and said, okay, let's go with it. And Ant said, I suppose that means you weren't going to want this sooner than later, right? And Chris had his quoted as saying, well, you know me, I always want it sooner than later. And he said, so he walked into another room full of other people and said, all right, let's go. We got to get going on this. And so Chris took this prototype, he took it to Hawaii and gave it to professional, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention their names either, professional Hawaiian guitar musicians and sake players and that kind of stuff. And then he took it to Japan and showed it around to certain people in Japan. And then he called from I think, Japan and said, how soon can we get 15 of these? I need 15 of these. And so it started. So this was in like February. So it's been less than a year. This thing has basically gone poomp through, and this is the first of a series of guitars. What does that mean? Are they all going to be the same design but different woods? Maybe. Are they going to have different body sizes? Or they're going to start going into experimenting with other things along this line that'll be, inspired by Hawaiian music, and maybe. So I think it's going to be very exciting, very interesting. So this guitar is made with Hawaiian koa back and sides. Mm-hmm. It's not lost on me that at least once upon a time, and probably still, Martin owns land in Hawaii specifically for growing Hawaiian koa. So they can, their own supply chain. It can be their own supply chain. And of course, these first models have really beautiful Hawaiian koa. A lot of people know, if you look at vintage Maritns, not all koa is spectacular, medullary rays and fiddleback and all that stuff. It can actually look fairly plain, sort of cross between mahogany and maple look to it. But so we'll probably see a mixture of koa in terms of the visual, how picturesque it is. However, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they're going to follow the Gibson HG thing, is that I end up seeing maybe a mahogany family HG, maybe we will say a rosewood HG, and maybe we'll see rosewood HG with fancy pearl trim and style 42 or something like that. All of that's certainly possible. Martin made Hawaiian guitars in style 42 and style 40 in the 30s and 20s. So here's some interesting things. It's got gloss finish, so it's style 28. It's got the real dovetail neck joint. It's got scallop bracing, and it is, they're calling it a spruce top. Pretty sure the ones they made right now is Sitka, but you're probably still going to run into that. Could be Sitka, could be Lutz, depending on that sort of stuff. It has the modern straight line bridge, so it has the kind of the straight bridge that was on these kind of guitars in the 1930s, but it's probably not nearly as paper thin as those were. But but also to be able to fit the modern drop-in saddle. Other style 28 stuff. It's got the antique white binding. It's got the style 28 rosette. It's got herringbone trim because Chris wanted to go with herringbone trim, and there were definitely some 28 guitars that were made in Hawaiian style. Actually, a guy used to play dobro player for me, but he typically played a vintage Martin Pride 00 28K. So the bracing size, what's that?
And that had a herringbone.
Yeah, yes.
Oh wow.
So that was from the 30s, or maybe it was at 29. I forget now. But I think it was a 14 fret, so it was from the 30s. But there's certain things that aren't on the spec sheet that I think people would like to know about. One of them is this guitar has a new neck. So it's a new neck shape. They're calling it the GE modified low oval. And this, yep.
I have a question.
Yes.
How can there be a golden era version of the modified low oval?
Well, they're not saying exactly. So I'm not saying exactly, but there's more mass to the neck. So it's not exactly a 1930s heel that they came out with. When they first came out with the OM18 GE, they changed the GE heel to one that was much more like a 1930s guitar, which then fattened up the barrel all the way down on that. So it was a modified V, but it still had a tubbier barrel to it.
Okay.
And that you get in the later GE models from the time that model came out. That same 1930s heel is used on the authentic models. This guitar doesn't have that, but it's inspired by it. And this comes probably from Hawaiian musicians who were in on this, who said, we don't like the modified low oval, it's too low. And they wanted a bigger neck. And so it's not entirely accurate to say this is the CEO neck, but only they flattened the V out of it. But it's kind of the CEO 7 neck, only without the V. But it's style 28, and it's got a vintage style volute on it, so it's got a longer shape to the volute. The diamond on the back of the headstock's longer, and which also I think affects the feeling of the V in the first position. Yeah. And it also has an authentic fretboard, authentic series fretboard. So this fingerboard is thinner. So it's thinner, vintage fingerboard. But not only that, it's shaped like the authentic fingerboard, which a lot of other guitars that were made with authentic fingerboard thickness don't have. And very subtly on the authentic series, the edges of the fingerboard are actually sloped over a little bit. They're rounded off. And which certainly makes a big difference for people who thumb fret and play what they call the American style, where you're fretting up here as opposed to the European style where you're, fretting with your thumb at the back. And because of that, they've also tweaked the string spacing on the nut. So it is, I don't have the actual measurements, but it's cheated in a little bit. So the string spacing is a little narrower at the nut to compensate for that roll off on the edge of the fingerboard, to keep the high E string and the low E string from being pulled off the fingerboard easily. So brand new neck, and I can't wait until I can get a chance to really sit down and play the finished product through and really get a feel for this new neck, because I have a feeling that people are going to really like it a lot. Craig likes it a lot, and he likes the normal modified V's. So it's not too small for him, but it's going to have a little more oomph to it, particularly probably in the cheeks. I think you'd probably say in the cheeks, because of the shape of the hill and that volute, you're going to get a different feel, even though it's the back of the neck is similar to the modified low oval. So none of that stuff's really mentioned. The other thing that's not mentioned is bracing is from the CEO7. This guitar really was taking the CEO7 and changing it. So that was really the starter model. They went to the CEO7 and said, okay, let's take this bracing pattern. What can we do to this to work with this new silhouette? And that's how they created this new guitar. So it's definitely a small guitar. Compared to anybody who plays dreadnoughts are going to feel this is a small guitar. Anybody who's used to playing double O's and L double O's are going to feel, yes, I am getting more voice out of it. So it's very well balanced, but just like those dreadnoughts they make in the 16 series with the triple O depth, it definitely doesn't have that power of a dreadnought, doesn't have that overwhelming kaboom of a dreadnought, but you definitely get it's a unique sound, and it is, it's genuinely new. It's new in the way that the Grand Performance was new to Martin. There's no modern Martin that sounds like this. And I think particularly fingerstyle people are going to really like this guitar a lot. And there'll probably be a lot of people who've always wanted to own a Martin made a Koa, but have never been able to justify it. And now you've got several big reasons to take that step with this new unique HG-28 Oahu.
Well, with all that talk about the neck, and to keep the theme going of shrinking things down, making things playable, making them comfortable, there's one more spec that jumped out at me. I don't know if I should have had expectations, but I'm a little bit surprised it's short scale.
That's exactly right. And it's a short scale instrument that, again, this thing really owes a lot to the CEO7. And the CEO7 owes a lot to the Gibson L00.
I was going to say, is this showing a lot of Gibson influence when it comes to scale length too?
It's showing Gibson influence from the scale length and the shape of the body, but not a whole lot else, because Martin's bracing is very different than Gibson bracing. And I mean, Gibson certainly started using X bracing, and they did their version of the X bracing throughout the 30s and 40s and all that. But that's one thing that it doesn't get mentioned a lot when you hear about these Ditson models, like the Ditson 1 and all that stuff, that these are not replicas. They refer to them as replicas. They're not replicas of the old Ditsons because they don't have ladder bracing. They have X bracing. The Ditsons didn't have modern X bracing. They had ladder bracing, or I forget what the other word for it is, linear bracing or whatever they call it. So they were definitely did not have the power and sort of modern power and volume and dynamics and headroom and all that stuff that you got out of the ones that Martin made later on. Just like the Major Kielaki's bracing isn't the bracing on the actual guitar that Martin made for Kielaki in the 1915 or whenever it was, 1914. It has the modern authentic series bracing that they used on the D-28 authentic 1931. So these are not, they definitely are being made with a modern Martin audience in mind. This too, the original Gibson Hawaiian guitars, the necks are big, square wonkers. And those Royce Mechs, stuff like that, they're just mammoth because they, it was more about protecting the integrity of the neck. I don't even know if they had rods in them. So, but this is definitely a modern neck. It's just made a little more massive in terms of a little more, it's a little thicker. Still got the modern, string spacing and all that stuff. And let me just see. I got their public sheet open here. Let me just make sure that I see what they say about this and what they don't. This is something. Oh, they have the yellow side dots. That's interesting. So kind of vintagey looking. But they went with the high performance taper, and I think that was something that was being debated about whether they were going to go with the standard taper or the high performance taper. But they went with the high performance taper. So it's 1 3/4 inch at the neck, but it's only 2 1/8 at the 12th fret. So it's very similar to the standard series instruments, except for the thinner fretboard that allow much more vibration in the neck. Also the slight roll off on the fretboard, and that's more like an authentic series. But again, it's revolutionary in the sense that you're getting a true authentic fingerboard shaping, but it's got the modern, sleeker fingerboard profile. So I'm excited. I'm very tempted by this. My initial thoughts are always wait for the rosewood one, but I've always wanted to own a Martin Koa guitar. From my memory, the greatest Martin guitar I've ever heard was a 1930 0028 K. No, I'm sorry, 0040H. It's a 0040H that had been converted to Spanish styles playing.
Wow.
And Koa top, and just after all those decades of being played in, was just the most beautifully complex. I've never been to Hawaii, but it just made me feel like I was out there with all those sights and sounds and colors, and it was an amazing guitar. So these guitars have spruce tops, but it's still it's always made me want to own a Martin guitar from Kona.
Can I ask you another insider question? And if you can't answer it, you can just say, like you've been saying?
Sure.
This is a two-parter. Are you surprised this doesn't have a Koa top? And do you know if any of the prototypes did? Next question.
No, I'm not surprised. I think they know that first of all, the Gibson had a spruce top, and it was actually a mahogany guitar, and the 22s, and with a probably Adirondack top in those days, but it was a Sitka top. This one's Sitka and Koa, but he wanted to go with Koa because for the homage to Hawaii, and so that's what they went with. I would not be surprised if we don't see an 18 in the near future. And probably a 42 with rosewood. Those are just my guesses.
You heard it here first. I do have one more question before I ask you 20.
Okay.
Not that I would have to answer questions as a dealer anymore, but if I bump into anybody on the street and they say, hey, you're those guys from the podcast, what Martin guitar do you think this most closely resembles? Because they're going to say the Dreadnought, the Kealaki, the whole story about Hawaii. I think it's obvious by this part of the program, this is not a Dreadnought the way we think of Dreadnoughts. What's its closest cousin, even if you don't factor in the Koa?
That's an excellent question. Next question. I would say maybe the GPCs. I don't think that's fair necessarily, because GPCs are bigger than the triple O's. I would say this is not as big as a triple O in terms of the body volume size. I think it's actually it's because the O-double-O, the double O long as they call it, has nothing to do with the Gibson L-double-O. The double O L long double O is a volume that's in between the 14 fret double O and triple O. But I know Chris just absolutely loved the fact that it was a slope-shouldered guitar with a long neck, short scale, but not a 12 fret neck. He loves that whole era of experimentation when there was lots of different designs coming out by all these guitar makers, and some of them worked better than others, and some of them didn't. And this is one that didn't, but it was definitely in the not exactly. He considers it a missing link. He considers it a missing link between the Hawaiian music craze and the modern guitars that Gibson and Martin ended up using and revolutionizing. To invent the modern American guitar. His great grandfather is credited with inventing the American guitar by combining German Vienna guitar making with the Spanish guitar making from Cadiz and coming up with this unusual new guitar, and then coming up with the X-bracing that invented the American guitar, and that his grandson Frank Henry Martin and other people like John Dykman, who is credited with the guy that really kind of made the first dreadnought and made the first OM, invented the modern American 14 fret guitar. But here we have Gibson also making 14 fret guitars, and though Martin can officially say they beat them to it, but it's really, I don't think Chris thinks in those ways. He just loves the whole age of invention that was going on at that time, and that he's surprised that Gibson didn't do something with these HGs, and so now he is.
And it's worth mentioning, a lot of people out there would, look at the new NAMM show coming up, and every time different manufacturers bring out more guitars, people are crying, oh, they're just going to come out with another OM, 2 more dreadnoughts, and another this and that. They just keep repeating everything. They're so set in their ways. Those people should be happy that this is a true innovation, and even if this guitar doesn't check all the boxes for everybody or become mainstream, at least you can't say that with the release of the HG that they're just rinsing and repeating the same thing all the time. Those people should at least be happy. Martin's doing some forward thinking here for sure. Even if it is going into the past, this is definitely not just another cookie cutter, make another colored version of something or another Strat. It's at least new in those ways.
It'll be fascinating to see, because a lot of those people who say those kind of things will now have something new to complain about as well. But then you have... and then you have the old timers who say that they should only make D18s and D28s as well. So, but I'm curious. I'm very curious to see. I think this is going to surprise a lot of people. I think a lot of people will be interested in it. I think the fact they're putting Oahu on the headstock, some people won't like that. Not traditional. It's not. At least it doesn't have like a trademark brand name, little trademark circle on it. But I think it really shows Chris's interest in this idea and this project, and that he is happy and proud of Martin's legacy of having embraced what was genuinely a foreign entity when the Hawaiian exposition opened, and the Pan-Asian exposition opened, and the Hawaiian Pavilion was such a huge hit and was considered so exotic. And who knows, he's been to Hawaii on multiple occasions. Maybe he has an affection for Hawaii in general. But yeah, very exciting. I think it is. It's truly new sound. Nothing sounds quite like it. Will it be for everybody? Nope. I think it has a lot of check boxes for me. Short scale, I've converted to short scale for my hands. Bigger body, bigger voice. So I can't wait to sit down. Probably Rudy's pretty much retired now, but I'll go to his shop and as soon as they get one, and really play it alongside an OM and a Dread, and really get a better feeling of how it compares in terms of the dynamics and that kind of stuff. And But yes, you said it came upon you. It came upon everybody. I think this was probably originally going to be released at the NAMM show. But you know how they tend to want to release something right around this time of year. You know, they kind of slip something in. But there are definitely people who are complaining out in the press world. The press embargo, like when I get certain things that are sent out, like you did as a dealer, there'll be a press embargo on it, say, you know, embargo and until January 10th or whatever. Like, you'll receive that now, you know, or they'll tell me about it and say, but the embargo, and this isn't until January. The press got 1 day notice. They got less than 24 hours notice before this thing was. The press embargo was through Tuesday, and they got it on Monday, and it came out Tuesday, or however that worked. And so this could very well have been Chris Martin at the last minute saying, okay, we're ready to go, let's just go now, and not hold it to the show. But so, or maybe something else was going to come out now, and they decided not to bring that out, and they decided to go with this. Who knows?
It could be any of 20 different things, really.
Possibly, because it does happen. He has been known to pull things at the last minute, put them off to another show, cancel projects altogether, and also just a little bit of a teaser. This because people have already known about this. Chris took this prototype around, you know, and showed people it. So I'm sure this stuff leaked out here and there, but you know, frankly, I'm surprised it didn't leak out more than it did. But and I don't ever say anything until I see something in print that somebody else put online. I won't say anything until an embargo is up, unless somebody else leaks it. And even then, I'll write, you know, to Jeff Allen or somebody and say, look who's talking about this. Can I talk about this too? But that's a very good point. I think, and what guitar does it really fit with? It doesn't. That's what's cool about it. Maybe the L-00, it doesn't have the OOL, it doesn't have that sort of tubby mid-range thing you hear when you're a player that you get out of that. That doesn't really translate to the listener. But so I think you can't really say an M, but it's filling a niche, as they would say across the pond, about a short scale guitar that still has a bigger guitar kind of feel to it. And so I think there'll probably be Dread owners who'll be drawn to this in a store in a way that the old size 7 never drew them, in the way that the baby Maritns and the juniors, you know, don't. Yeah. And it's a, you know, full size Martin, full real Martin in terms of made in Nazareth with the full dovetail in the Style 28. Interesting version of Style 28 because of the dots rather than the diamonds and, you know, stuff like that. But it is what it is, and I think it's pretty exciting.
The only last little piece I haven't brought up so far that I recognized in some chatter, some people are wondering, for a guitar that costs this much to come with a gig bag, people are surmising maybe this shape doesn't have a case that fits it yet. Is it just one of those things too?
That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that, actually. That's a very good point. And as ever, when it comes to the prices of new models, particularly unusual models, most of them tend to come in higher than people think they should. And some of that has to do with the amount of money that went into having to retool for the guitar and that kind of thing.
Oh, sure.
And so is it entirely a cost-cutting measure? That's now something makes sense to me. Something makes sense to me because I remember somebody saying something about the color of thread on a new something or other. And never mind. You got my wheels turning now.
All right.
But yeah, and I'd be curious to see what the gig bag is really like, you know, and to see how nice it is. But but yeah, so the Oahu, it's new, it's interesting. It's a little pricey for me. That's why I'm curious to see if they do come out with an 18, what it's going to be like. But everything's pricey for me now, you know. I mean, I can't get over the fact that Dave's Hot Chicken, the pieces are now half the size, and the kale slaw has no kale in it. but which a lot of people won't be disappointed to hear. But it was at least the one nutritious thing on the menu, the one thing that wasn't bad for you on the menu. But yeah, everything's more than we want it to be now. So at least $20 more.
Insert.
What does that make you think of?
Insert charming segue right here. 20 questions.
Oh, charming segue. What a great name for a soap opera character. Okay.
I can't believe he was killed off.
He was so charming. So charming segue into 20 questions. The game where one of us, and in this case, the smart guy, being Maury, thinks up a Martin guitar that's available for sale within the Martin catalog, that's still for sale out there in the world. And the wise guy, being your humble spoon, has to guess what model it is within 20 questions of yes-no questions. Up to 3 of those questions are allowed to be the name of a model. And is the Swami zeroed in?
I was born zeroed in, Sarge. 20 questions on the clock, and go.
Go. Is this guitar made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Does this guitar have a dreadnought shape?
Yes.
Is it a 14-fret guitar?
Yes.
Is this guitar made with rosewood back and sides?
Yes, it's a good one.
Is this guitar made with Adirondack spruce top?
No.
Okay. Does this guitar have Guatemalan rosewood back and sides?
No.
Does this guitar have pearl around the edge of the top?
Yes.
Does this guitar have pearl on the back and sides?
No.
Is this guitar in the standard series?
Yes.
Does this guitar have snowflakes on the fingerboard?
Most of the time. Yes.
Is this guitar a D42?
Yes.
Da-da-da-da.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Bonus question. Does this guitar now sit in the case because the person who bought the D45 Fire and Ice never plays it anymore? Yes.
Ooh. So, is this guitar a right-handed guitar?
Yes.
Currently for sale?
No.
Oh, I thought you were saying he was going to have you sell his guitar for him.
No, but I have to wonder if our friend Lee ever plays his D42 anymore because he brought a shiny new D45 Fire and Ice home. That might be just for the Patreon side of things. I will be careful to edit that.
Yeah, so you can always get his permission. Am I allowed to mention this?
Let me see what he's doing.
And
I'll call
then
him.
you can send my guys his address and...
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're allowed to tell you what he's going to do with that guitar, but I will give you his address after the program's over. Congratulations, Spoon. That was a pretty good one. You got that in 11 guesses.
No, certainly not my best, but yeah, you picked one that required narrowing down. So
I will tell you on the record, off the record, I almost picked the Major Key Alaki, but I thought you would have snapped right into that.
no, but if you would have said no, didn't have a dreadnought shape, I probably would have guessed the HG-28 Oahu.
Well, we're not going to do that again. Well, folks, I don't know if this episode brought you all the way to Hawaii in your dreams, but we do hope you get the opportunity to both play the HG-28 and visit the island of Hawaii in the near future. I haven't played the HG yet, but I can definitely tell you that visiting Hawaii is highly recommended.
Maybe someday.
Let us know in the comments if you're watching the YouTube version. What do you think will happen first? We'll get to play the HG-28, or Spoon will take me to Hawaii.
Gee, that's a toughie.
HG, that's a toughie.
HG, that's a toughie. So good. Thank you all for. I'd be curious, if people have other questions, they can put in the comments. We're always interested in hearing people's opinions. If you're watching the YouTube version of this and want to put your opinions there, do check out the Martin Guitar. They have their own sort of online pavilion just about this guitar, as well as that interesting video. I'm curious to know if they're going to release a longer version of it, because they're sitting with maybe 20 guitars. And I don't know if all of them are there because of the Hawaiian guitar craze influence or not, but I would be very curious to see more of that video someday.
Me too. And speaking of that video and things in it, I don't want to tell tales out of school, but we just might, probably, definitely, possibly have an episode coming up later this season with something or someone in that video and another guitar we can't talk about today. Stay tuned. And from all of us at Maritns and More, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.